Grandin, thank you for joining us tonight.
Okay. Good to be here. And it's my understanding this is occupational therapy class.
Yes, so we are occupational therapy students, and also there are some occupational therapy clinicians.
But everybody is an occupational therapist.
Yes, some of us are students and some of them are just professionals.
Okay, so it's both students and professionals. Okay, I kind of just like to know who I'm talking to, so that's good.
Yeah. So I would like to ask you if I can record this event.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. It's recording. So, Maribel, would you like to introduce yourself? And
absolutely.
yeah.
So welcome everyone to Navigating Autism with Dr. Grandin. My name is Maribel McAlintal. I am currently the secretary of the New York State Occupational Therapy Association, and just wanted to let you know that this event will be recorded and will be uploaded on the website for NYSOTA members in the event that you want to look back on this and see if there's anything else that you missed. So with that out of the way, I will turn it over to Luis and Dr. Grandin.
So I'm an occupational therapy student from your college, and I would like also Professor Pakpatans. He's my professor. I would like him to introduce himself because he is here to help also.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Vikram Pakpatan from your college. I also work at Downstate University. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is going to be a great session with a true subject matter specialist on the topic. Dr. G, thank you so much for your time. And Louis, take it away. This is being recorded now and will be available through NYSOTA.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I was collecting many questions from many students that they want to know about you. So please let me know if any question sounds like inappropriate. We can move to the next question. So the first question is like, many students, they would like to know, when did you learn for the first time about autism?
Well, when I was born in 1947, doctors didn't really know what autism was. And I was taken to a neurologist and the diagnosis was none of brain damage. I was not talking until age 4. I got into very good early education. I had all the classical symptoms of autism. I mean, today it would have been automatically been an autism diagnosis. And very good speech therapy, a lot of emphasis on learning how to take turns. My speech teacher would slow down when she talked to me, because when people talk fast, it went into gibberish. So when you're working with these little kids that aren't talking, slow down. You also have to give them time to respond. They're like a slow computer. It takes time for them to respond. Also, I had a lot of emphasis on learning how to take turns at games, learning how to wait and take turns. That's a really important thing to teach these little kids. So I was very lucky to have that. And then my mother always worked on encouraging my ability in art, building up my ability in art. We have too much emphasis on deficits. And art was very important to me because that formed the basis of doing design work. One of the worst things I think schools have done is taking out hands-on classes. When I was in elementary school, I would have hated elementary school if we hadn't had art, sewing, and woodworking. That made elementary school fun and made me motivated. And today I'm a college professor at Colorado State University, Animal Science Department.
So many people are associating like autism with sensory issues. Do you think, based on your experience, that is always the case, or this thing of paying attention to details is a stereotype, or do you think it is different, depends on the person?
Well, sensory issues really are real. Now, if there's one place I'd like to see a lot of research done, it is on sensory issues. And they're very variable. Some people have visual sensitivity issues. I didn't have those problems. Then there's other people that have touch sensitivity. They have sound sensitivity. When I was a little kid and loud sounds went off, so I wrote one of my books, Emergence. It was like a dentist drill hitting a nerve. And so it was a big issue. Now, sometimes a child can learn to tolerate a loud noise, like a hairdryer, if the kid turns it on and off themselves, where they control it. And sometimes they can learn to tolerate it. And a big mistake that's often gets made is wearing headphones all the time. Wear them all the time, your brain gets more sensitive. But what you want to try to do is have them with you all the time, so you have control. But then you try not to wear them. But they're there if you really need them. That gives the child control.
So in the case of teenagers, what would you say to them if they feel like they are not fitting in society? You know, when they are in that time where they have like crisis of identities and they are dealing with autism at the same time, how parents can manage that and how teenagers can manage that?
Well, I was bullied in school. And what I strongly recommend is the teenager needs to get involved in activities with a shared interest. And for me, it was horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Get the child involved with things where there's a shared interest. And sometimes a student develops an interest. When I was in high school, I didn't know what model rockets were. And then one day I saw them demonstrated, and that got me interested. Students get interested in things they get exposed to. It's just that simple. But that's where I got friends. And so the more different kind of activities like that you can do where there's a shared interest. One really enterprising teacher in elementary school, this autistic kid was getting bullied and she started a Star Wars club. Easy thing to do. And then other kids joined the Star Wars club. And that was a very easy thing to do, and it didn't cost anything because they did most of it online, but then they'd have meetings and talk about the movies they'd watched and Star Wars conventions that they looked at online.
So speaking about the movie, what do you think about your movie?
Well, I thought they did a very good job showing visual thinking. That's really important because you really see how visual thinking works in that movie. And they also showed off all my projects, which I really liked. That was important. And
So
there's a question there about therapeutic riding. Horses were a big part of my life as a teenager. I learned how to work cleaning 9 horse stalls. In fact, I've got a paper you can look up online. It's called How Horses Help the Teenager with Autism Make Friends and Learn How to Work. Because every day I cleaned 9 horse stalls. But I also worked on getting horses ready for showing. And I had a roommate. I was in a special boarding school at this point. And we would work on getting the horses ready for show. You see, that's a shared interest. And then when it comes to little kids, there's been some parents who said their kid did their first words on a horse. And I think that's due to the vestibular stimulation, rhythm, balancing.
So do you think the movie was accurate based on your the events that were happening in your life?
Well, the movie, they always have to, change a few things. But what was really accurate was the visual thinking, the main characters, Anne at the ranch, Mr. Carlock, my mother, they were shown very nicely. But what's really important, it showed sensory problems accurately, and it showed visual thinking really accurately. That's important. And it also showed all the things I had built, all the projects shown in the movie. I actually did them.
Based on my assumption or understanding, how did you get to the conclusion that animals can think in pictures also?
Well, animals don't think in verbal words. Now, when I first started working with animals, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I didn't realize that other people did not think in pictures. And so it's obvious to look at what animals are looking at. And this is my book, Thinking in Pictures. And it now has a new afterword that's updated. And it now explains that there is different kinds of thinking. You've got visual thinking, you've got mathematical pattern thinking, and then you've got word thinking. And all through my 20s, I thought everybody thought in pictures. Then when I got in my late 30s, that's when I discovered that everybody did not think in pictures. And it was a real shock to me when I discovered that other people didn't think the same way that I think. And the way I discovered it was I said, think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? And I was shocked when a speech therapist just, that's all she saw. The only image she saw was this vague pointy thing. I see pictures of specific places. I'll name them off. Visual thinkers, it's very specific. Oh, the name of the movie is Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is the name of the movie, and it is on Amazon Prime, and of course the HBO website. Amazon Prime is probably the easiest place to get it from. And then the title is Temple Grandin.
What advice would you give to parents that they are at home and they're thinking like, my child has autism and is not talking?
Okay, now, when a child is 2 and 3 years old, you can't tell which one's going to start to talk and which one's going to remain very challenged and not be talking. I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. And I worked with Deborah Moore on another book called Navigating Autism. This just came out. And where this book is really good is for that new parent that's just freaking out and really upset that their kid has been diagnosed with autism. They think it's just going to be totally terrible. And the big mistake is people get locked into the label. Deborah Moore calls that label locking. And you forget to see the whole child. And so where this book is really good is a new therapist and a new parent. That's where this book is really good. If you've been following me for a long period of time, you might say, well, it doesn't have anything new in it. You might want to read one of my other books, but you get the parent that just thinks that diagnosis is the end of the world. Child at age 3 can look really bad. I looked just terrible when I was age 3. I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. And there's a lot of arguments about different types of therapy, but everybody will agree these kids need 20 hours a week of one-to-one teaching with an effective teacher. I get asked all the time, what's an effective teacher? It's going to be more speech, more skills such as dressing. That would be better turn taking at games. That's an effective teacher. And a child should like going to therapy. If a child hates going to therapy, then it's likely that maybe the teacher's forcing that kid into sensory overload. Then you need to get a different teacher. A good teacher knows how to be gently insistent and just push just the right amount. You got to push a little bit to get, I call it stretching. And when I was a little kid, I liked going to therapy. I remember doing some fun things like marching around with flags. I thought that was a lot of fun.
There is a question from the audience, and they are asking if sensory integration therapy is aggressive.
Well, sensory integration therapy definitely is evidence-based, and it's one of the things that works. And one kid might be a responder to swinging. Another kid might be a responder to pressure. They're very variable. And yeah, see, you need to keep these things fun. Where there's been problems is where a teacher just got too rough in a kid's face and drove that kid into sensory overload. And that's really bad if you do that. You gotta be careful not to do that. And some kids are more sensitive. Sorry about sneezing. Some kids are more sensitive than others. Mm-hmm. Some kids you can kind of, my teacher would grab me like this, but then shortly after I wrote about that, Donna Williams wrote, and this is a long time ago, that if that had been done to her, she would have gone into sensory overload. So some kids you can push a bit more than others. And that's where a good teacher has sort of the ability to know just how to push to get progress, but not push and cause sensory overload. No, because that's completely bad, making the kid get sensory overload.
How would you, what ways would you use to explain to a child that they have autism?
Well, I didn't really know I had autism until I was nearing the end of elementary school. I just knew I was different. Well, a fully verbal kid, don't let it hold you back. Elon Musk has autism, and he announced it on Saturday Night Live. You know, Elon Musk is SpaceX. Einstein would be in an autistic class today. I was reading a very interesting book that my mother gave me for Christmas about deciphering the Rosetta Stone. And there were 2 people that deciphered it, and they were math. One was a mathematician. Both of them loved languages. I think both of them were autistic, and they deciphered the Rosetta Stone. Interesting book. You need to be reading that based on, looking at how those people did it. There were two guys, one in France, one in England, and they didn't like each other very much. But they, one was definitely looked at it mathematically. And then the breakthrough was when the one that's in France figured out that sometimes a picture of a lion was a lion. Other times it might be for the letter L. And another time it might be just for the sound of something.
And during this COVID pandemic, how do you think children or population with autism are experiencing their?
Well, I think
situation?
COVID's been a disaster for little kids. Younger the kid, the worse it's been. That's where it's the worst. Kids need to be out socializing and learning how to work with other kids. Well, the thing about someone said they read something online that you shouldn't push this and push that. Well, the thing I think you should do is expose kids to a lot of different things. Okay, take model rockets. I got exposed to them once and I got interested. Another kid might not like the way they go shushing off and too much sensory overload and hate them.
Mm.
But I think it's very important to expose kids to enough different things. I ended up in the cattle industry because I got exposed to it as a teenager when I was in high school. Kids aren't going to know what they're going to love or hate if they're not exposed to things. And I've got books that I've done. One of them is called The Outdoor Scientist, and we need to be getting kids outside doing things. This book, Calling All Minds, that's got my childhood projects. We've got kids today that have never made a paper airplane. Like about 20% of the kids in Colorado haven't done that. And this is getting kids outside, The Outdoor Scientist. And this starts out with my sisters and I had a rock collection. And we had a great fun with that. But you have to get exposed to stuff. If you show them something they hate it, well then, you drop it. Let's say that there's too much noise from model rockets, then you don't do it. But I just saw model rockets once, and my science teacher was running the model rocket club, and I definitely got involved in that. But I wouldn't have gotten involved in it if I hadn't been exposed to it. Because there's some things you don't know if you're interested until you try them. And we're getting a lot of kids today totally addicted to video games, and they are not learning how to work and getting jobs. And my kind of mind, the visual thinker, tends to be the worst on getting them addicted to things like video games. And there's been 3 successes where in young adults, video games were replaced with auto mechanics. And the young adult found that auto mechanics was much more interesting than video games.
Mm.
But you have to try it. And you'd wean them off of it slowly. Gradual transitions are always better with people with autism, not sudden transitions.
So in cases where the children they're lacking social interaction skills, how would you do that? Like gradually?
Well, I can tell you how it was done in the 50s. And this is one of the reasons why there's a lot of granddads that find out later on in life they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. Well, in my neighborhood, and again, this is something that doesn't cost anything to do, 7 and 8-year-old kids, when the parents had a party, you put on your best clothes and then your little hostesses and hosts for the party. And you had to shake hands with the guests, pass the snacks around, and learn some social skills. And that's something that was just done in the neighborhood. You learn how to greet people. And I kind of liked it, being grown up, get to participate in a grown-up party. And that's something that everybody has parties. That's an easy thing to do. Now, one of the things where there's been a problem, let's take with a nonverbal teenager, and you're just trying to teach him his colors, and he gets frustrated. Well, that doesn't have any relevance to him. Let's teach him something that has relevance. Okay, if you have $5, what can you buy with it? Then you start to learn to understand money based on what you can buy with it. $5 to buy a meal at McDonald's is not going to buy, a piece of furniture.
So for young adults, who are struggling with the routines, like if you want to establish a routine, or if you want to change a routine?
Okay, first of all, don't have it be a surprise. No surprises. Okay, let's say they're going to be going to new school. Well, if possible, let's visit the school before they go. Or if it's not possible to visit it, let's look at have some Zoom calls, talk to people. In other words, don't have it be a surprise. Also, another principle is gradual transitions. Like, for example, on learning to work, you could start out with volunteer jobs at a church or a synagogue, where they learn how to do something, a task on a schedule, somebody outside the family is the boss, gradually, working into working, and you gradually introduce things, and you don't have it be a surprise.
Mm.
They know about it up front.
What do you believe that is the role of OT with autism right now? Because we are increasing, we are learning different ways, we are having more knowledge and more experience. What do you think we are missing, or if we are in the right track when we are dealing with autism?
Well, when I was out working in construction, I worked for every major meat company, designing projects. And when you're weird, the way you sell your work is I simply showed off my work. The way that I sold jobs is I would show people pictures of my work. Like right here, there's examples of one of my drawings. And I would show that off. But you work into it slowly is what you need to do. And sometimes things do have to be changed. I had to make a sudden transition to online classes. Wasn't easy. But when I was working in these construction projects, I'm going to estimate about 20% of the skilled tradespeople, and I'm talking real high-end skilled trades, make things out of metal off of drawings, were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And I'm not, again, something like welding or mechanics, that's not for everybody. But again, you don't know unless you are exposed to it. And for some of the visual thinkers like me, they're extremely good at skilled trades stuff. I think kids need to get exposed to a lot of different things. And then also the things that get fixated can change as they get exposed to things. Like when I was in high school, I got totally fixated on the rotor carnival ride. Well, I went on it once at a carnival. And, fixations can change just based on things that things you are exposed to. But the thing I always want to emphasize is there's been some pretty successful people in history that were autistic. Einstein was one of them. You see, the problem we've got with autism is you're going all the way from Elon Musk to somebody who can't dress themselves, and it's got the same name, which doesn't really make much sense to a visual thinker. But the problem is when the kids are little, like when I was 3, you can't tell the difference. Well, the one hint, and they did test me for epilepsy, and there was epilepsy free, is if there's no epilepsy in the little kid, that usually improves the likelihood that they'll talk. How would I define autism? In the mildest forms, I think it's just a personality difference. In the most severe forms, yes, the person's got some real not talking is definitely a disability. And there are some nonverbal people with autism that can learn to type independently. And you want to read about some of the sensory challenges that they have. You might want to read Tito Muckapatahay, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? That is available as an ebook on Amazon. Carly's Voice, be another one. And then the sequel to The Reason I Jump. That's written by a Japanese boy that types independently. And he talks about difficulty with controlling movement and with sensory scrambling. And socioeconomic status, where I've seen the best outcomes with people from low income has been in skilled trades. I know a guy who has a private jet, born dirt poor, every diagnosis in the book. He runs a gigantic specialized food factory today. He's just as autistic as he can be. I can't tell you what he makes or where it is, except it is in the US. And he's my age. He's in the 70s. This is why it's important to get kids exposed to so many things.
How a child can find a mentor to have to go in the right direction, to go to transition to high school?
Well, I had high school was a disaster for me in a regular high school. And then I went to special school, and that was expensive. Now, up until high school, things that were done with me, like a lot of stuff could be done, fairly easily. My science teacher took an interest in me, but sometimes mentors get attracted to ability. So if the child's good at math, then the math teacher gets interested, or good at steel working, then the people working on that get interested. And I had a very good mentor in the construction industry that was just starting a small construction company. He was a former Marine Corps captain, and he helped me get a business started. This is where I'm a big believer in developing the kids' strengths, because people thought it was really weird. But when I showed off my drawings, they just couldn't believe it. Develop strengths. You have another kid that's good at math. You got a third grader that's good at math. Move them ahead in math. Move them ahead in math. And the thing that's interesting is some of the people that helped me the most, they did not have a therapy background. There was Mrs. Deach, elementary school teacher. There was Mr. Carlock, NASA space scientist. That's true. There was Ann at the ranch. She was another important mentor, and Jim the contractor, former Marine Corps officer. These were some of the people that really helped me. And coming from the 60s, there was too much of the Freud psychoanalysis nonsense, and that none of that was helpful. What was helpful was mother developing my ability in art. When I was 8 years old and I didn't know how to read, she taught me with phonics. Worked with me for an hour after school, and I very quickly went to no reading, 6th grade level reading. And what she did wasn't that hard. It's a lot of complicated stuff for teaching phonics. First thing you need to do is teach the kid the ABC song. Because if you know your ABC song, you got half your sounds. And then mother put the alphabet up on the wall and just had me learn the sounds. Then you get a book the kid might be interested in reading. Get a book worth reading. And mother would read a page out loud, and then start having me sound out some words.
There is a question here about, since the field of psychology wasn't developed years ago, do you feel the diagnosis procedure has grown to be more precise and inclusive?
Well, we're doing a lot better with the little kids, but where we're falling down is the transitional work. We're really falling down on that. And when I see a lot of parents baby their kid, I'm seeing teenage kids doing really well in school, and they've never gone shopping by themselves. They're not learning the most basic skills. And some moms just can't let go when I suggest that her kid needs to go shopping. I was shopping when I was 7 and 8 years old. Just on the most basic stuff. I think part of the problem is too much getting locked into the medical model. And that's one of the reasons why I did this Navigating Autism book with Deborah Moore. She says you got to look at the whole child. Don't just get locked into the label. And that book's really good for the new parent and the new therapist. So the new therapist doesn't get too locked into all the labels. And then I've got another book, the way I see it, that's the how-to book. Okay, now you're going to do something about it. This has got lots of really simple little how-to things.
One question, we as autists, we are very passionate about our field. We want to make a real change in other lives. So what can we do in the field of autism to make a real change? Well,
that's kind of general. I want to answer this question about the visual thinking. And the person wrote here, Casey Lines wrote, everybody forms mental images. How is visual thinking different? I'll tell you right now, not everybody forms mental images. And there are some people that are very highly verbal. Most people do form mental images of stuff they're very familiar, like their own car, their own dog, or their own house. But there's some highly verbal people that have, in fact, it's called aphantasia. This is extreme lack of visual thinking. And then a lot of the mathematical minds, they calculate, they figure things out by calculating. not by seeing it.
Do you think there are like parent thinkers, like they are good at music and math, or it's
Well, basically the way that what the research is showing in the Autistic Brain book is the research, my kind of mind is probably going to fail algebra and be really good at art and mechanics. Those are the two things my kind of mind's good at. The mathematical minds, of course, mathematics, computer programming, the more mathematical parts of engineering, and verbal thinkers are good with words. And then a lot of people are kind of mixtures. Now I'm getting a lot of questions here about immigrant communities. And I've given talks in a lot of very low income areas. And I say, look, the most important thing you can do with a 3-year-old is you've got to get them working with an effective teacher. And if there's no services available, you need to get some grandmothers in the community to start working with that kid, like now. And that's where I'd recommend getting my Way I See It book. Because the worst thing you can do with a 3-year-old is not talking is to do nothing. And then do things with a kid. Go for a walk in the park. Go look at birds. And, there's plenty of stuff you can do. But you've got to start working with little 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds that are not talking.
There's a question here about about using sign language with children with autism.
Using what kind of language?
Sign language.
Well, it's so important to give a child a way to communicate. You've got to have a way to communicate. And there's some kids can learn sign language, or they have a picture board they can point to. Okay, so on a low income, maybe you can't afford some fancy device, but you can take a piece of cardboard and put pictures on it. Anybody can do that. The other thing for typing is a tablet with a text messaging program. They can type on that. Phones are too little. I'll tell you, no matter where you're at, there's plenty of old tablets laying around. And if the text messaging program works, that's all you need.
There is one like polemic way of saying things. How we refer to autism, we say children with autism, autistic kids, because there are many.
Well, on that, but basically, a lot of people that are on the spectrum would rather say autistic. I'm autistic, and the educators like person with autism. But some of the advocates would prefer autistic person. Now let's talk about some of the transition stuff. There are some things that I cannot do. I cannot multitask. So I'm not going to take the autistic person and put them on a super busy takeout window. That's way too much multitasking. Also, I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. Any task that involves a sequence, give me a pilot's checklist, step 1, step 2, step 3. That's really important. I have no working memory. So those are things that I've got to write it down. Okay, like how to, do the cash drawer at night, for example. I might have 5 or 6 steps. I need to write those down. That's what
you think if you
but
are.
the biggest problem I'm seeing on transition is I'm seeing a lot of parents getting so overprotective, their kid isn't doing the simplest thing, like going in the store and buying something.
So do you think that if a person is very good at one thing and is not that good at the other thing, we should go in the right thing direction, or we give the chance?
Well, for me, it was absolutely useless to pound away on algebra. I basically failed the college entrance exam, and I got into college because my mother pounded open the back door of a brand new little startup college. And fortunately, the required class in math was not algebra. And I'm never going to be able to do algebra. Now, so I want to put emphasis on the strengths, but there are some things you're going to need to do. You cannot be a filthy, dirty slob using a bunch of swear words. That's not acceptable. There's some basic social skills like shaking hands. I mean, you've got to, I call it business social. And that's stuff that you need to learn.
How do you navigate when you are missing some skills and you have to use them? For example, you are a visual thinker, but you have to verbalize something and you are not good at.
Well, I can verbalize things because I was a good writer. I had good teachers on writing, and the way I learned to write is the teacher marked up my writing and made me correct the grammar. and I learned it that way. Basically, to function in the world, you need old-fashioned English and arithmetic, the way it was taught up through 6th grade in the 50s. You can run a company with that, but you do need that. Read and write at the 6th grade level, the way it was taught in the 50s. You can run a big shop very successfully and even have a private jet. I've seen it. I've been in 2 different jets that came from people with that kind of a background. But
So,
you do have to be able to read and write and do arithmetic. I'm not talking about algebra. At up to the 6th grade level, find the area of a circle. You've got to have that for hydraulics and pneumatics. That I know how to do.
there's a question about how was it taught in the 60s?
Well, you learn to, learn fractions. You learn to measure angles. The way they're teaching with the Common Core now, I looked at some 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade lessons. I'm going, you got to be kidding. Okay, to teach the idea of fractions, you can cut up a pizza. To teach the idea that a fraction is part of something. And just basic adding and subtracting. And I was taught to borrow in subtraction. I'll tell you one thing, I was allowed to mark the paper. If I had not been allowed to mark the paper, there's no way I could have done it. I don't have enough working memory. But things like finding the area of a circle, finding the area of a complex figure, finding percentages, things like that.
But that is
Okay, like what's 20% for a tip, for example, at a restaurant?
so when you were designing the Carol thing, you were working in a team, right?
Yeah, and then basically what I did in the cattle things, I did the drawings, and then somebody else did the welding. But I did all the drawings. And I learned drafting. I worked at a construction company for 1.5 years. I learned steel and concrete work. A lot of people I worked with, it was all on the job training.
Another question I have is like, what do you think is more beneficial? When you are working with individuals with autism, is better to have more than one together, or is better to go like individualize every single person? Like for example, you want.
First of all, I got to know age. Age. You see, the problem is we have very verbal thinkers here, and you're overgeneralizing. Okay, am I dealing with a 3-year-old here, elementary school, high school, or adult? And then I got to get some idea of the speech level, and then I can give you ideas on how to work with them. See, my mind is bottom up. Little kids, I can tell you pretty much general what to do. But once they get past age 5, one kid may need to be advanced in math. Another kid might have horrendous visual processing problems. Another kid might be very sensitive to noise. Another one can't talk and can't dress themselves. Well, obviously, I want to get skills like dressing and using the toilet, for example.
When you are thinking about, someone who can help me about this situation, comes to your mind occupational therapy as a resource, or do you think about?
Well, I think about occupational therapy like in sensory integration, but also, I mean, some of these kids have motor skills problems, and there's special utensils that are easier to hold. Like, for example, when eating American style, let's pretend this is a fork. Okay, this is the way you're supposed to hold a fork. I never could do that because the meat would be on the floor, so I hold it like this. Now that's still neat. I'm not putting my fingers in the meat, but when I was a little kid and I tried to hold it like this, the meat would end up on the floor, so they let me hold it like this. Okay, and that still looks neat. It's not sloppy doing that. I still do that. I think we're getting a lot of questions here that are very top down, very verbal. We got let's talk about this 25-year-old autistic woman from Calf and Run stuck in a rut. Okay, I need to learn more about her. Okay, is she verbal? What does she like to do? What is she doing right now? Just sitting at home? I need more information about this woman before I can tell you any ideas of what you can do. And you see, being a bottom-up thinker, I'm going to go, well, maybe she's like this other case I talked to somebody 10 years ago about. stuck in a rut. What's she doing? Maybe she needs a new job. Maybe she needs to get out of the house. I don't know enough about her. Many times in my life, I used a life coach, not formally. I think Jim, a former Marine Corps captain, was a very good life coach. Anne, who had a ranch, another really good life coach. My mother, as a little kid. There's a tendency now for a lot of parents to overprotect. And you might have a nonverbal kid that's got some motor control issues, and they just put the coat on for him. In fact, Noki, the Japanese boy who's nonverbal, complained. He called them carers, that his carers in Japan would help him too much on things like putting a coat on. Okay, she likes children. Well, maybe she could do something. She's never had a job. Well, I think now we need to get a job. And sometimes we need to forget about the front door with interviews. You know, who owns a little shop that she could start working in? And I want to go with the quieter things where there's been some very big successes. Ice cream store has been successful because it's much quieter. Office supply store, auto parts store. These are real cases that have been successful because they're pretty quiet. Specialized retail clothing store, when sometimes can be chaos at Christmas time, and that was not successful. I think she needs to get out of the house and she needs to get a job. And let's figure out some choices that she could do. Does she like animals? Volunteer at the Humane Society. There's a lot of people doing that. No, she needs to get out, and maybe she can do something, some volunteer job working with children. And the other thing is that eventually you have to do it. Too often parents go, well, we're thinking about this. Well, we got to actually start doing a lot more doing. No, she needs to get out of the house and start doing something. Give her some choices. We could try working with the dogs at the Humane Society, or maybe you could volunteer the synagogue or church nursery school. You see, now I just see it. And those are simple things that can be done in immigrant communities, low income. These things don't cost anything to do. One thing ever good about New York is you got really good public transit. Can she use public transportation? Maybe she needs to learn how to go on the subway. You know, I'll tell you, it was last year was the first time I went on the New York subway myself. I managed to go all the way home all by myself on the New York subway. Yeah, but that maybe she needs to learn how to use that. Get out and doing things. And you work into it gradually, and you give some choices, like which station maybe you go to. You can look at the map and pick out a station. See, choices are important, limited choices. You could do this station or that station. See, as a visual thinker, I just see it. I see the big station that's near where my mother used to live. But I'm trying to get you to think about it in a kind of more different way. See, a lot of these questions very generalized. But this girl that's, you know, young adult, I've talked to a lot of them. I talked to one today. She's sitting at home, a lot of friction with her mom. I said, you got to get out and do something. Like just get a job and get something. There's not too much multitasking. There's a zillion jobs right now. Everybody's hiring. I can't believe all the hiring signs I see. Bagging groceries is sometimes a good job. But the mistake that gets made is often people don't differentiate between where bagging groceries is a suitable career for certain people, and for somebody else, say it's a training job, and then they need to go on to something else.
We're almost finishing.
When working with autistic kids, in a school setting, you see, then you get an inclusive classroom versus self-contained classroom. I'll tell you something I don't want to see. I don't want to see a 6-year-old that's, you know, fully verbal and everything in with all the more severe kids. That I don't want to see. And we need to work on developing interests. And then the other thing to do with fixations. Let's say the kid is fixated on cars. When I was in 3rd grade, all I did is draw pictures of horse heads. And then mother suggested drawing the entire horse. Let's draw the stable. Take that thing and broaden it. Kid likes cars. Let's read this physics of how a car engine works. Do mathematics with cars. Do art with cars. You see, you can make a car theme in many different things, and then you broaden that fixation. into something that's a lot less fixated.
So one general question is like, what are you most passionate about right now? What is your project? What are you doing right now?
Well, one of the things is I'm getting very passionate about the visual thinkers like me that can't graduate from high school because of algebra requirements. They're not even allowed to take the welding class because they haven't passed 3 algebra classes. That needs to get dropped. I want to see kids get out and do things. Okay, here we got a middle school kid, nonverbal, loves Super Mario. Well, what other things is he doing? Now, this brings up the whole video game thing. I'm not a believer in totally banning it, but it's got to be limited. But then you have to have other activities to replace video games. You've got to replace it with something else. Okay, this middle schooler, I'm going to ask, can he do basic skills, dressing, bathroom? What other things is he capable of doing? Has he shown any other interest? But you've got to remember, he's not going to show interest unless he gets exposed to things. Maybe he might like a sport, but you wouldn't know until you try it. Okay, here's a 4-year-old nonverbal, won't try new activities. Mom's overprotective. Yeah, you see, this is a really big problem. I'm telling these moms, you've got to let go a little bit because otherwise the kid's not going to develop. What you have to do is stretch. Be very careful not to force them into sensory overload. But even Noki, the Japanese boy, in the book that was a sequel to The Reason I Jumped, said that sometimes the people taking care of him helped him too much. He wanted to learn how to put the coat on himself. And she just wants him to stay quiet. That's one of the reasons why they get addicted to video games. Now, a lot of these moms with a 4-year-old, they're going to need to get some help. And if it's a low income situation, this is where you need to get some volunteers to come in and help. Enlist some of the grandmothers in the neighborhood to come in and help them work with this child, because that mom, if she's a single mom and trying to do a job, she's not going to be able to do it. She's going to be too stressed. And you've got to help them. The other thing I'm seeing when kids go to college is when they start to flunk a class, fail a class, they don't ask for help soon enough. Biggest mistake that gets made. They don't ask for help soon enough. The other thing with some of this interviewing stuff, let's just get rid of the interviews. Just go in the back door. And the thing I learned, an interview for me was lay the drawings on the table and show off pictures of jobs. That was an interview for me. Show the portfolio. We need to be doing a lot. If the child's really good at math, then show off some of the math and have it neatly presented, not in a messy binder. You basically want a 30-second wow. And lacking confidence. One of the things that helped me with confidence was those parties where I had to go up and greet the guests, selling candy for charity in the neighborhood. These are simple things to do. Your synagogue, your church also has a lot of activities. Get the child involved in that. And the thing, I had some problems with not being motivated. And then all of a sudden, I got exposed to model rockets. I got really interested in that, instantly. And I knew we had to learn how to test our rocket, make sure it was stable. The one they used in the movie, they didn't test it right to make sure it was stable. They had a lot of trouble with it.
We have in the audience some professors, and they would like to know how to prepare future therapists like me on interviewing, to develop techniques to interview children with autism.
Well, one of the things I think a lot of therapists need to do is get out of the therapy box, learn more about industry. I spent 25 years in heavy construction. And I worked with all the special ed department builds the stuff. And that totally changes the, see, I don't look at it with the medical model. Okay, so if a guy can't talk, we got to give him a way to communicate. For some, it might be sign language. I like typing on something because that's easier for other people to read that. Like if you have a piece of cardboard with the typewriter keyboard, that's too hard for other people to follow that. you know, there's handy dandy little devices, but they're expensive. Old tablet text messaging program, because it's very important that the print appears next to the keyboard, because they cannot make the attention shift. Okay, I'm on this desktop. My hands are way, way, way down here. But if I type something, it's up here on the screen. And the thing that they can't do is make the shift from the keyboard to the screen. So something like a tablet's going to work better because that print appears right there next to the virtual keyboard. And old tablets, they're all over the place. It's easy to get a hold of old electronics. That's not hard, no matter where you're at. There's tons of them around.
So there is a last question here that it says, my brother was recently diagnosed with autism. He's 20 years old, and he's all the time at home playing video games and using the internet, and he has difficulty socializing and trying to find a job.
All right, does he have any interest other than video games? Because a lot of the video game players are the visual thinkers. And when he was a child, did he ever show interest in art? Now, it's not that I'm trying to push auto mechanics for everything, but the only 3 cases that I have where weaning off of video games was successful was to auto mechanics. And he's 20 years old. Could he start helping out in a shop, some little neighborhood shop that does mechanical things? And you just would work on it slowly. Find some neighborhood, you know, mechanic that I need to learn a little bit more about him. But and then a lot of social skills can be taught. First of all, you cannot be a filthy, dirty slob. It's okay to be eccentric, and you can't go up to people and say swear words to them and things like that. You've got to be civil. But I would start to say, let's try to replace the video games with some other things. I need to learn a little bit more about it. But what I'm seeing with the 20-year-olds, fully verbal 20-year-olds, I'm seeing 2 paths: to the bedroom or the basement to play video games, or get out and get a life. But I also want to emphasize it's never too late. And if he was a kid that liked to play with Legos when he was younger, maybe he needs to become a mechanic. I don't know what his reading level is. I've got to have at least 6th grade level reading. At least 6th grade level reading is pretty high level reading in the 50s. And I did that just fine. You know, so you've got to be able to read at least at that level. But you have to replace it with something else. And okay, you say finding a job lacked the social skills. Well, someone has to coach him at the job, like coaching somebody on how to behave in a foreign country. Nothing's instinctual. Everything has to be taught. Okay, let's say you're working in a store. Well, you have to not get too close to the customers. You might say, well, watch Susie over there, how she interacts with the customer. I want you to copy it, because it's going to be like acting in a play. And he has difficulty engaging in activities of daily living. You know, this is where you need some mentor, drag him out of there and someone start working with them. The other big problem is anxiety. And in my book, Thinking in Pictures, I describe my experiences with panic attacks and anxiety. And I have been on antidepressant medication since 1980. That's over 40 years. I've been on the same drug, an old-fashioned drug called disipramine. And the big mistake that's made with antidepressants when they're used for anxiety is too high a dose. And that's a disaster. And even though this is 25 years old, that stuff on the drugs is still accurate. And I recommend reading that one chapter. It's called A Believer in Biochemistry. I don't think I'd be where I'm at now if it wasn't for the medication. And the only side effect I have is I have to drink a lot of water.
So we are.
But it stopped the constant panic attacks. And some of this playing the video games. I used to do compulsive typing on an old manual typewriter because I was less nervous when I was just compulsive. And when they play those video games, it makes them less nervous. And then you get really nervous about going out. There's way too many drugs given out to little kids like candy. Totally terrible, completely terrible. But I went on antidepressants at the age of 33, and my health was falling apart with colitis. And I did those dip fat projects that were shown in the movie before I did the medication, but I was kind of falling apart after that. There's a lot of adults on the spectrum that talk about autistic burnout. And I think it's just, horrible anxiety. My nervous system was in a constant state of fear, absolutely no reason. And when I went on that medication, well, of course, young people don't know what a carburetor is, but it has what's called an idle adjustment screw. And it was like turning the idle motor speed down of my nervous system. That's what I use for an example. You might have to look it up on Wikipedia what a carburetor is. But that was, so the motor basically is not racing. That's my nervous system was just constant state of fear for absolutely no reason.
So I would like to say thank you for joining us. And today is Martin Luther King. So thank you everyone for this amazing event. I would like to ask you if you would like to meet in the future again with us, or if you would like to share your email, or if people can contact you from further.
Yeah, you've got the Cheryl Miller's email. If you have a specific question, and you see, now I just was saying right there that the this person was only interested in computers and video games. Maybe that's all he's been exposed to.
Yeah.
See, that's the problem. I got interested in cattle because I got exposed to them as a teenager. Hadn't been exposed to them, wouldn't be in the cattle industry. And I got to thank my aunt. And the thing in my case, especially as an adult, the people that helped me were not therapists. I'm not saying I'm against therapists, but they were not therapists. They were a Marine Corps captain starting a small construction company. They were Ann at a ranch. Of course, my mother when I was young. My science teacher, NASA space scientist. And the thing that was good with him is I was still seeing him after I was in college. So it made a really good continuity between high school and college. But those were people, especially when I was older, that were very, very good. And the teachers I had for speech, there were two speech therapists that had a little school in the basement of their home. They were definitely extremely helpful.
If they have any question, I can send them your email. If they have a specific question.
You've got Cheryl Miller's email. Send the questions to Cheryl Miller's email.
I want to type my email if they have any questions.
Yeah, you've got Cheryl Miller's email.
Oh, they share the email? Okay.
Yeah, you've got Cheryl's email. You've got it.
Yes. So thank you so much. And we will keep in touch.
Well, it was good talking to everybody. And what I hope I have done is gotten you to think about these things in a somewhat different way, a little less medical model.
Yes.
Because I worked with, can't believe it, special ed department builds a lot of the stuff. And because they were building things, I'm seeing young kids in elementary school that are building with Legos and nobody thinks to introduce tools. Well, I was using tools in 2nd grade and a little handsaw in 5th grade. And I was using them safely. Okay, teach math with Legos. Those are, yeah. The other thing is, it was someone that's nonverbal, is you've got to make the things that you're teaching them relevant to the person. Just learning colors in a vacuum, that doesn't mean anything.
So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Temple Grandin. It's a pleasure meeting you. We are honored to have you, and we will keep in touch.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to leave the meeting, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, great.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.